Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Insight to and Sustainability Across Disciplines. This session is Soil Stories. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects in development here at the university. Today's session is going to be a little bit interesting. We're going to have some Q&A, both in person and through the Zoom. So if you have any questions, we just ask that you raise your hand or activate the chat, and we'll be sure to call on you. With that, it is now my pleasure to hand it back over to P.K. Langshaw, Professor, Design and Computation Arts, and Fellow of the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability. P.K., welcome.
Yes, thank you. Am I on? Good. So yes, I just want to introduce, we came from Careers in Sustainability. I mentioned Anna Noel and opportunities while you are a student at Concordia in preparation for your career in the future. And at the same time, it's a wonderful collaboration between fine arts and the Faculty of Arts and Science. So Anna Noel, student and RA, for Melody Lynch, who comes from the arts and science. So with that, I'll let you introduce yourself, and it's really nice to meet you, Melody.
All right, hello everyone. So yes, I'm Anna Noel. So I'm a fifth-year design student with a minor in urban studies. And over the past year, I've had the pleasure of working with Melody Lynch here, who I had as a professor.
Thanks, and thanks for coming, everyone. I'm Melody. I'm a part-time faculty member in Geography, Planning and Environment, and I've been there since 2021. Today, I will be talking a little bit about a project that kind of stems from my PhD work as well at McGill University in Geography. So just to get started, I'll present a few slides about the background research that I've done, and then I'll pass it to Anna, who did this wonderful project last summer.
Yeah, and so we'll start off with us talking here at this table, and then Melody and I will roam over to our little display area to talk further about the artwork that was produced, and then we'll come back here for a Q&A session, and then we'll invite everyone after that to spend some time over in that area looking at the work.
Great. So yeah, our project and our talk today is called Soil Stories. It's an interdisciplinary project between art and science. It's based, like I said, on my work for my PhD on urban agriculture in Malaysia. And so just a little bit about urban agriculture in Asia in general. Recently, there's been this politicization of urban agriculture. So governments are increasingly recognizing urban agriculture as a potential for, improving food security for its urban populations and also for supporting urban sustainability more generally. So it can create green spaces, for example. But in Asia, there's limited research available to support emerging policies on urban agriculture. We've only seen research being interested in this topic in this region in about the last 15 years. And so what I found is research is lacking in some important ways. So first of all, it's occurring in disciplinary silos. A lot of research on environmental aspects or health aspects, social science are all happening separately. And I've also noticed, unfortunately, a lack of work on equity. And so how emerging policies can support equity, I think, would be really important. So this is kind of the area where my research tries to address. And I've designed this interdisciplinary kind of mixed methods project that tries to combine environmental, health, and social sciences in ways that support equitable urban agriculture endeavors. And so my study took place in Kuching, Malaysia. It's a medium-sized city on Malaysian Borneo. So I'll try to point it out on the map. Oops, that's not right. It's just over here. On the island of Borneo. It's the capital city of the state of Sarawak, which is one of Malaysia's largest agricultural states. So yeah, a medium-sized city, 650,000 people. It's also one of Asia's leading World Health Organization designated healthy cities. So what that means is this idea of a city being conducive to healthy populations, not just with available Medicare and hospitals and such, but the physical built environment and the social environment also are considered as contributing to health and well-being. And a little bit more about Kuching. A Malaysian NGO named Kuching the City of Unity because compared to other Malaysian cities, it has a really diverse population that live together in relative harmony. So we have a large population of Malay, Chinese, and indigenous groups all living in the city, getting along relatively well. And those groups also practice different religions, including Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, and some have animist beliefs. So for my project, like I said, it's interdisciplinary, and I used a mixed method approach. So I visited 100 different urban agriculture or urban gardens and interviewed the urban agriculturalists that were cultivating them. So I was interested in learning about their motivations for undertaking urban agriculture and also their experiences with that. Then I've also taken a plant sample and a soil sample from each of their gardens, and I was looking for heavy metals. So specifically, I looked for lead contamination in the soils and in the plants. I did that through an elemental analysis using an X-ray fluorescent spectrometer, which is just kind of an X-ray gun that you shoot at the soil and the plants. And then I did a few other soil analyses to test the texture of the soils and the acidity, and also looking for organic matter. So for organic matter, you have to burn the soils or cook them really in a muffle furnace at 550 degrees for several hours. And so that really kills everything in the soil, but also changes the color, and the color changes depending on what is actually in the soil. So that kind of gave these interesting, beautiful materials that Anna worked with later for the project she'll talk about. So I won't go too much into my results, but I just wanted to pull out two different kind of themes. The first, I realized that what's often overlooked in the literature on urban agriculture when we're talking about well-being is a focus on how it can really benefit people and have meaningful or be meaningful for their culture, for their religion, and for their spirituality. So for example, different cultivators used what they grew in their gardens to share with other people, and also at the same time to become closer to their religion. So in Islam, Muslim respondents would say that sharing is an act of sedekah, and it would bring them closer to Allah. So having things from their garden that they were able to share did bring them closer in this way. For my Christian respondents, people would bring things to church. They would share with their neighbors as part of being a good Christian. And then in Buddhism, sharing is also a key value and virtue, and people grew specific fruits that were also used for sharing in this way, and also for different religious practices. I also noticed that people planted fruits and flowers at a specific time, counting the days until they would ripen or that they would bloom to kind of coincide with important cultural celebrations. So Hari Raya for my Malay respondents, Gawai for the indigenous respondents, it's a rice harvest festival, and then Chinese New Year for Chinese respondents. What I didn't mention here is also sometimes the fruits and vegetables that they would grow have spiritual value in themselves. So like the pomegranate, for example, it's red, so it's a lucky color in Chinese tradition. It has thorns that can ward off evil spirits, and it has like these jewel-like seeds inside. So it's also a symbol of prosperity. And so the gardens were also shaped around individuals' kind of spiritual beliefs. And just a note for sharing, for lower income individuals, being able to grow their own fruits and vegetables allowed them to share in this way that they wouldn't necessarily be able to do because they might not be able to go and purchase things to share. So yeah, cultural and spiritual religious factors were one kind of overlooked aspect that I found in the literature. And another result that I found is food safety as being a really important motivation for growing your own foods. So a lot of my respondents had this kind of cynicism or skepticism regarding the safety of the foods that are available for purchase at the market. A lot of them coming from China, or a lot of foods, they're just not sure how much pesticide is being used, and so they prefer to grow their own food. And a lot of them think that their foods are safe, so they choose to practice organic methods of cultivation or pesticide-free. But while they're really aware of pesticides and the health implications of that, a lot of respondents told me that they weren't really that aware of other kinds of risks, including heavy metals, for example, which makes sense. You can't really see them. You don't really know you might not know what has happened on the land before you started to cultivate. And so that's just a little bit tricky to know if there are any trace metals in your food. So 96 of my respondents, of my 100 respondents, thought their foods were safe or very safe. But from the vegetables that I sampled from their gardens, 42 of the 100 did have high levels of lead that exceeded Malaysia's limits for lead in food, as well as Canada, Australia, European, and USA limits. So this is really alarming for multiple reasons. First, because lead does cause a lot of health problems down the road, but also because people aren't even aware of it. And so this was a really important kind of factor that I wanted to communicate with my respondents. And that's kind of where Anna comes in. I needed to have a creative way of explaining these really complicated and technical results with respondents who don't really know much about it. And unfortunately, the lead that I found in the soils and in the plants were correlated with this common practice of burning rubbish or trash either in your garden or near the garden. And so there needs to be a larger kind of movement in Kuching to support better practices for waste management. And that can be trickier. It's always trickier than you think to change people's behaviors. So that's another thing that we need to communicate to them as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Anna.
Yeah, so I was a student in Melody's urban ecology class in fall of 2023, and I was extremely interested in her approach to research and her work with her PhD. So I began chatting with her about that, and then through further discussions, then mentioned that I would love to be her research assistant for anything that she needed. And then she contacted me about some graphic design work for her PhD. And then that started now almost a year and a half long collaboration between the two of us. The project began in winter 2024 in January with the creation of a booklet. So the final is here, and you can look through it as well after. So the initial plan was to have this booklet that would be able to share Melody's research back with the community members. And so she had already commissioned a local illustrator to do drawings and paintings for this booklet, and then also was working with a local translator who she had worked with in Kuching during her interviews. But then the translator would then translate all of the work into multiple languages. And so English and Malay are the official languages of Malaysia. However, as Melody mentioned, there's a large Chinese population as well as multiple indigenous groups. And so it was important that the booklet was able to communicate to all of these different people and be as accessible as possible. So what we ended up with is a booklet that has English and Malay on one side. Where's the camera? There's the camera. So on one side of the spreads, it's English, and on the other side, it's Malay all the way through. And then you flip it, and then you have Chinese and Bidayu, which is one of the indigenous languages. So all of these illustrations are by the local artisan as well. So as we were working on this, then Melody also mentioned that she had all of these soil samples left over from her work. And she had envisioned something creative being done with them, but that she wasn't an artist, but she had this and she offered them to me. I thought that she had maybe 10 or 12 samples, But then when she showed me everything that she had at the McGill Geography Lab, it was over 100 samples of soil, all in small bags, all of different colors and textures and shapes. And immediately it was like, oh, what? Like I had never seen anything like it before, especially because here, like we're used to seeing soil in like very neutral colors and quite similar colors. It's not often that we get this much variation. And so what you can see on the screen here are all of the samples. So we took them out, photographed them, and then this is kind of the like baseline for the rest of the creative project. And so we began with some very simple creative inquiry with just trying to figure out, okay, what's next? Like we have a few months, let's do this. And so I began with focusing on the senses. And so how could they be explored through different ways of seeing them? Then also smelling them. As a design student, we often like to smell things as a first point of inquiry. And so we did that. And when we were looking at them, then figured, oh, it would be great to have a microscope to look at these even closer. So we got a digital microscope and then ended up using that in the later half of the project. And over the course of last winter, we progressed this booklet, we progressed the initial part of the soil exploration, but then we really decided, well, we really wanted to take it further. We felt like there was a lot of potential with the research, especially in expanding it from just being this way to communicate back the knowledge to the Kuching residents, but then also, now that the soils are here, how can we share the value that they have and the stories that they have with a greater population that has no connection to Kuching? And I've never been there. Melody lived there for 5 months during the study. But now that these soils were in a completely new area and detached from where they were from, how could we progress it further? Especially with my coming from an artistic context and a design context, in what ways could they be reconfigured into this new realm of my personal interests? So then we applied for the CUSRA grant, so the Concordia Undergraduate Student Research Award, actually 1 year ago today, which is pretty cool. This is a beautiful like full circle moment right now. And so we applied for that, which allowed for full-time funding throughout the entirety of last summer. So this was my summer job last year, working with Melody on this project. And we really felt like there was so much potential to explore the material care. There had been so much care put into the material from the residents themselves of Kuching and from all of the different urban cultivators and just of the different stakeholders that are working within the city to provide safer experiences with gardening and with being a healthy city, a green city, and a city of unity. And so then our true moment was that these soils had reached the end of their life in Melody's technical study. They had been burned at such a high heat that they had no more agricultural value, like they had no more life in them. And so they were just pretty dirt. And they also weren't in Malaysia anymore. So then it's like, okay, so are they gonna sit in a box forever? Or is there a way that we can use art and design to further their life? And so at the beginning of the summer, we started researching different types of, different researchers that have been using this approach of experimental geography. And so I built quite a lot on Trevor Paglin's work on experimental geography and how we can use the arts to explore different types of geography, especially when scientific research has reached its endpoint, and as well as Megan Kelly and the art of geographic experimentation. So with that, we embarked on a multi-phase journey that it took the form in this book, it took the form in this book, and then also in some soil tiles and videos that we'll show later. It was quite a beautiful challenge, I'd say, to work on this because there was so much that we wanted to explore and so much that we wanted to say. There was the full matters of care area, like is referenced by Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. She looks at how agriculture and permaculture can be used to really explore care, both our care and connections to the land, but also to each other. And then Max Liboron, who works with discard studies and what types of decolonial and anti-colonial approaches can we have for waste, particularly with geographic study. Because a lot of the time researchers will go into a specific area and then interview local residents take their resources, work with their land, and then not return any sort of result to the communities. And that was also part of Melody's approach, to then return back to Kuching and deliver the results, deliver these pamphlets, which will be happening soon, not quite yet, but so then how can we find ways to respect the people that these resources are from, while also showing them respect in terms of not discarding them and finding new ways to explore their life and their properties through art. And so now we're gonna pivot over. So Melody and I are gonna go pivot over there. You all can stay here, and I'll show you more about the creative works. Okay. So if you're sitting here, you can either see me here, or you can see us up on the screen there potentially. Or
Just give us 1 second. You'll see our
Totally.
camera making their way over to you and in there.
Totally. You want me over here? Okay, cool. All right. So we'll start off with.
Hold on. I'll give you the go ahead when we're ready, okay?
Okay.
Great. All right, now we can all see you. Go ahead, thank you.
Okay. So we'll start off with these microscopic videos. And so we have 2 screens here where you can see them. And so with our initial inquiry into with the senses into the soil, then part of it was that we wanted to look at them not through an agricultural purpose anymore, but now why not through a creative way? And we don't often see soil at this level. So it was really just a point of interest of what do they look like at this way that we don't typically get to see them. So we bought a digital microscope, and then with the target samples, we focused on 5 samples throughout this creative journey, and that all had different properties, different colors and textures. And so with the videos, through different types of panning and zooming, then it explores the depth of the material and also looks at it through an artistic point of view instead of an agricultural point of view like they were used previously for. With the soil toxicity, as well as Melody mentioned, the risk is completely invisible. And so the respondents don't know their risk factors with lead, and no one in the city knows until there's some sort of inquiry and deeper inquiry into the work. Same with this. You don't know what the soil actually looks like and what each grain looks like until you make an active choice to investigate it further. And a lot of the research respondents replied to Melody's interviews with how they felt a mindfulness connection and a calming connection to the act of gardening, and how it wasn't only used to produce their own food, but also just as a way to center themselves and ground themselves. And as I was producing these videos and spending hours at my computer editing them, I found that I was getting into this meditative state of just looking at the soil and in this kind of transformative way. And so these are also meant to really put you into the state of reflection and focus with just a visual aspect of the soil. Moving on to the book here. Part of the research that Melody did was taking photos of the different plots of land and the different gardens. And it's not often within the arts that we have this privilege of knowing exactly where our artistic materials are from. Often, we'll pick something up at an art store, or we'll go to a lumber store, and that's our way of getting our materials. It's very rare that we know the exact place that they were grown and the exact people that helped produce them. And being that we had all of this information, that Melody knew these workers' names, she knew what their hobbies were and what their livelihoods were, and why all of this was important to them. She knew the amount of effort that they put into the soil. And she also knew all the types of plants that they grew on each plot of land. So having all of this knowledge, I wanted to find a way to share it and to make sure that these people and the work that they had already put in is continued to be cared about throughout the entire life of the project, and not as isolated knowledge for the people in Kuching, but then also as this project changes geographic location, how can this knowledge be shared? And so this book is a way to continue telling these stories. And so we focused on 5 different producers. And so it has a few different stories about what types of plants the producers grew, what type of soil they had, why they were farming, all of that. And then it also kind of traces the different pathway of looking at the soil through different perspectives. And I also just loved the pictures. And this is a favorite of mine. And so it has a pineapple growing, but covered in a plastic bag on the plant, right beside a road and right beside people's houses. I feel like these photos that Melody took really show the examples of how these urban gardens are so closely integrated into people's lives in the city. And it's not just an isolated urban area or agricultural area. They all work together. With all of the soil samples, so building off of the studies of waste and discard studies, then all the different soil samples would have continued just in a plastic bag. And I really wanted to continue sharing the beauty that they had. And so I had been focusing on biocomposites as well in the time before this and still now, and decided to make a small biocomposite tile with each soil sample. So I think we have 90 of them here. And so they all have different types of plants that have been embedded into them. With Melody's reporting of the different types of gardens and plants, we know multiple different types of plants that each soil plot and each farm grew. And in the production of these soil tiles, each of them is mixed with the small amount of soil that we had left and agar-agar, and then imprinted with a type of plant and then dried. And so they're solid. They do produce a little bit of dust, but yeah, they're solid. They're completely dried. And so within them, there are samples of rambutan, durian, pineapple, aloe, chilies, lemongrass, turmeric, coconut, and mango. There are 9 different types of plants, and each tile has been imprinted in a different way. So this one you can see is durian, and so it holds the texture of the durian skin. Oh, here's a better one of the durian. There we go. And we have a piece of aloe here. There's some pineapple. We have, what else do we have here? Oh, we have some chili. Yeah, and so all of these different tiles, they hold the visual memory of the soil. Once it's just in dust form, then there isn't still the trace of what they once did. And we really wanted to try and continue sharing their entire life in this new context. Oh, sorry, there's some more over here as well. This one is the one that I love. It's corn. So by having the soils in this physical format, it continues to bring them to life, and it continues sharing the life that they once had and the lives of the people and producers that worked with them previously. So let's just take the time. All right, so we're gonna pivot back to the front and for our Q&A. All right, so it's Q&A time, and then we'll invite you all to look at the space in the front. Sorry, in the back, I guess. Keep going. Oh, you're getting a mic.
Sure, yeah. I'm curious about for the molds that you made, you said that you had the 9 different plants that you were using for them. How did you determine, was there any sort of thought that was put into which plants were going with which soil samples?
So using Melody's list of what plants were grown, I just looked for common plants. And so of course, there are some plants that we can't get here easily. And so I chose plants that were easily accessible as well, or at least somewhat easily accessible. You know, like go to specialty grocery stores and you'll find some rambutan. But so yeah, it was finding the common plants that were also most represented in the garden plots. And so there's a lot of durian. And durian is a very important plant for these communities. And it's a big community plant too, because they're massive. And so they need to be shared. And that was a lot of what Melody researched as well, of like this plant in particular, the amount of work that's put into growing them, and then also the amount of protection that people have over their durians is very important. And so, yeah, we chose plants that would have also like a good visual imprint. There are some, like leaves didn't really work, and so we wanted ones with a cool texture. So durian worked great for that. But so yeah, it was just like what's accessible and what will work well with this small tile format.
It's a great project, thank you. You talked about the different heavy metals that could be in the soil and the different pH levels. And I was just wondering whether the appearance of the soil in its dried form and in these tiles actually tells us anything about the presence of heavy metals and nutrients and pH levels. It's funny, I was kind of expecting the tiles to go back to the town and say, well, this might be a danger sign, you know. But is there any connection at all between the appearance of it and its form in the tiles and what you might want to talk to townspeople about in terms of the quality of the soil?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much. There is a connection. It's just not completely linear as you would expect. So when you process the soils at the 550-degree heat, what you're doing is you're releasing a lot of the matter that can kind of be like burned off. And so it does tell you a little bit about the organic matter that's in there and the iron, which indicates how available heavy metals will be to the foods to some extent. So it's just one aspect that contributes out of multiple aspects that can contribute to the kind of availability of lead in your food. Iron, yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah. And sometimes just the soil itself before being processed is just a different type of soil. So you would have the clay soils, you'd have different types of soils that are more gray or more brown. So yeah, the darker ones might have more organic matter, for example, and more organic matter means that the soil's holding on to a lot of the heavy metals instead of releasing it to the plants. But it's so difficult to say exactly, just because there are so many different forms and kind of factors that contribute to that. Thank you.
I'm noticing a lot of different elements from different topics, like the participant observation from anthropology, and then a bit of human geography, and you're looking at language, you're looking at culture, you're looking at all these interactions, and then you're also including hard sciences and visual arts. How do you see these different interdisciplinary approaches interacting together, and is there some form that you were putting weight on? Is there something you were really going for as far as perspective?
Yeah, I got that.
Do you want to start?
Yeah. I think, well, what we learned from the initial research for this project, but then also from what we've kind of learned throughout the process, is that where the technical study stops is a fantastic place for new ways of recontextualizing materials and recontextualizing the initial research. And art and design allows for that. There's no particular objective for artistic research or design research. Unless you're trying to make a specific object, then the outcome is so fluid. And so it provides this excellent space for these topics to be explored and not just a way of like, oh yeah, I need to make a book that says this. But instead, okay, what am I being given and what different stories am I trying to tell? And how can all of these different forms of research be interpreted in a completely new light? Mine, especially as artists and producers, if we have all of this knowledge of our materials and of the land and cultural workers that worked with these materials before, it's crucial that we continue to share these stories, because we're not just one person working in isolation. Especially in this case, being given so much potential and so much privilege with interviewing these different gardeners, and then, at least in my case, continuing Melody's research and really looking and learning from her research and her different research methods. It provides an excellent space to then jump off from in the arts, where kind of anything can happen. And that's why as well there are so many different kind of products of this work, because it couldn't be brought down to just one. We needed to make the booklet to return to the community members. But then the more that we learned and the more that we expanded on the care that we both felt for this project, then also the care that we learned about that was expressed from the community members. Like, okay, we want to tackle waste and waste regeneration and recontextualization. And we want to look at invisibility. And we want to look at like a mindfulness approach. And yeah, like there were so many different perspectives that the arts allowed for this interdisciplinary study to really be continued in. And I mean, that's a passion of mine, being able to combine these disciplines together. And so I'm very thankful to Melody for this opportunity and to be able to share on this level as well.
Yeah, I would just like to build on that and add that there are so many different ways of knowing about the world. And I think as a geographer, I was primarily trained as a social scientist. But when I started my PhD, I really wanted to kind of explore all the different aspects of geography that are available to us. And I think that at the, an interdisciplinary approach would allow for a greater view of, what's happening out there. And so I think building on natural science, social science, and now with art, we just have a more broader perspective and like looking from different kind of viewpoints to have a deeper understanding of the issue.
Yeah, thank you for this. Really, really interesting. Melody, I know you also are an educator as well. You teach. So I'm very curious to know if you indeed apply this kind of project interdisciplinarity to your teaching. And maybe I'm assuming that most of your students are from the Faculty of Arts and Science. How students might respond? Are they open to exploring, say, with zines or visualization of studies, research, and so on?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I do really try to do that. So the class that I've been teaching since 2021 is environmental management. I also taught urban ecology. But in environmental management, it's a small seminar class of 30 students, some of them more natural sciences focused and some of them more social sciences. And so everyone's coming to understand how we manage our environments from a different perspective. And environmental management could be taught from multiple perspectives. And so I try to really think about what readings we look at and try to draw from anthropology, from biology, from different kinds of perspectives. And we also engage in dialogue and debate, and we realize it's okay if we don't agree. There's not just one way forward, but just being aware that there are different approaches and different kinds of ways of looking at the world, I think is really helpful in fostering creativity that will allow us to approach environmental problems. And as one of our assignments, I didn't do it this year, but in previous years, we've done creative journal reflections where you can respond kind of in any creative format that you'd like. It doesn't have to be just with text. It could be with a collage or a photo essay. I've had people record songs. And so I think that also allows people to connect with the readings or the films or the podcasts that we've been assigned in a different way. And I think when it comes to the environment, it's really just about caring and trying, if we come together, trying to care about it then we'll maybe have more creative solutions. So yeah, thank you for that question.
And I'd also like to add, as Melody's former student, I found that this approach was also in our class. There was a lot of freedom with what we could do. But then also I found that her class differed a lot from the other urban planning classes that I'd taken that focused mainly on Europe, well, Western Europe and North America, particularly the United States, for its case studies. Whereas Melody's class finally brought in some global perspectives and perspectives that I hadn't encountered before because of the lack of expansion in the other urban planning classes. And so the base of urban political ecology and feminist ecology especially were very substantial and very influential in the broadening of at least my understanding of how these things can be studied. And it brought it out from just being there's like one linear way to study how cities function, to then, there are definitely other ways to approach research, and there are a lot more humanities-focused ways that we can be approaching geography, which then does lead into different qualitative methods and different artistic methods as well. So I found that very beneficial, and it definitely stood out in terms of what the other things I had learned in that department were.
We have time for one last question.
Super interesting. Thank you for that. I'm just curious if the book is already distributed to the communities, and the community reaction and participation, with this part of your research and project.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm planning on going back in June, first week of June. I've just had to coordinate with my translator on the best time for that. She's also an educator. And I have shared it with just a few of my kind of closer contacts there, and they're really excited to receive it. We also had the idea of making postcards or bookmarks with some key findings, drawing on the illustrations for people who may not want to read the pamphlet at length. And so I think having different visuals and understanding people's kind of needs or interests and what their level is in terms of like how deep they want to go into learning about the findings, I think that's really important as well. So yeah, it'll be distributed in June. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have time.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna just go ahead and close up the live stream, but thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We'll be seeing you back here, hopefully at 2:45 for our next panel discussion on ceramics. For those of you in the Zoom, we're gonna keep that Zoom open, and we will also hope to see you at 2:45. Thank you again, and if you'd like to revisit this conversation or share it, it's already on our YouTube channel. All right, we'll